Imagine waking up in the country where you work and live, only to be suddenly fired and told you have to leave immediately. Right now, thousands of families in the United Arab Emirates are facing exactly that. They are being handed termination notices and sent back to an economy that is barely staying afloat. What we are looking at is not a wave of corporate layoffs. We are watching a massive geopolitical ultimatum play out in real time. The decisions made in closed-door government meetings are now directly impacting the lives of everyday citizens, and the scale of this is moving incredibly fast. Since mid-April, verified reports show over 5,000 registered families have been forced to pack up and leave the UAE. On top of that, community leaders are tracking more than 1,000 men from specific villages who were just handed sudden termination notices. Their employers aren't doing this by choice. They are operating under direct government instruction to expedite these removals. But when you actually look closely at who is being removed, a much deeper strategy starts to emerge. At first glance, this looked like a broad religious sweep because the expulsions focused heavily on Shia workers. But the data shows us a completely different reality. Iraqi Shia workers in the UAE are untouched. Lebanese Shia workers are totally secure in their jobs. That instantly rules out religion as the motive. Instead, this is a highly targeted, deliberate political punishment aimed exclusively at Pakistani nationals. The UAE system is selectively filtering out one specific passport. So we have to ask, what exactly triggered this kind of calculated retaliation? The answer goes back to a massive financial ultimatum delivered right before these expulsions started making headlines. The UAE suddenly demanded that Islamabad immediately repay a $3.5 billion loan. You have to understand, this was not a routine discussion about restructuring debt. It was an abrupt, aggressive recall from a nation that has historically been one of Pakistan's most reliable financial backers. The diplomatic tone shifted overnight, and it pushed an already fragile state right to the edge of default. That $3.5 billion demand was a literal existential threat. If Islamabad was forced to pay that instantly, it would have wiped out 20% of the nation's entire foreign reserves in a single day. This wasn't just a request for money. It was a devastating financial blow designed to trigger an immediate and uncontrollable economic collapse. The government was suddenly just weeks away from failing to function on the global market. Total economic disaster was only narrowly avoided because another major power stepped in. Saudi Arabia came forward with a $5.5 billion bailout package and a brand new defense pact. They absorbed the immediate financial shock and essentially kept the government running. Now, on paper, this looks like a massive geopolitical win for Islamabad, but in reality, this exact rescue mission is what accelerated the crisis with the UAE. By aligning so closely with Saudi Arabia to get that bailout money, Islamabad walked directly into a massive geopolitical minefield. Globally, the UAE and Saudi Arabia project a unified front, but beneath the surface, they have very deep strategic tensions, especially over their conflicting military objectives in Yemen. When Pakistan grabbed that financial lifeline from Riyadh, they unintentionally pulled themselves into an escalating power struggle between Saudi Arabia and the UAE. For years, Islamabad's strategy was to operate right in the middle, in what we call the gray zone. They tried to position themselves as a neutral mediator in the Middle East. This allowed them to get financial benefits from Gulf states while still keeping a notoriously soft stance on Iran. The whole goal was to avoid committing to the hard political lines drawn by the major regional powers. But the reality of the Middle East was shifting fast, and that balancing act was about to fail. The entire strategy fell apart when the UAE suffered direct military attacks from Iran. In a moment of extreme national vulnerability, the UAE fully expected its historic allies to issue clear, definitive condemnations. But Pakistan chose to stay neutral. They refused to condemn the strikes because they desperately wanted to protect their relationship with Iran. You simply cannot demand billions in financial support from an ally under fire while refusing to take their side. That was the definitive breaking point. The UAE's response was swift and absolute. The message they sent back to Islamabad was incredibly blunt. From now on, relations are strictly black and white. There is no more gray zone. The era of acting as an opportunistic mediator while quietly taking billions in aid is permanently over. The UAE made it crystal clear that they view this type of neutrality not as smart diplomacy, but as a direct strategic liability. Because of this massive diplomatic collapse, 2 million Pakistani workers currently living in the UAE are now trapped in the fallout. You have 2 million people who suddenly find themselves operating under a harsh new reality, where their host country views their home government with intense distrust. Their visas, their livelihoods, and their basic family security are now entirely vulnerable to these diplomatic severances happening at the highest levels of government. And the economic threat of these expulsions goes way beyond individual families. It is structural. These millions of workers sent home a staggering $8 billion in annual remittances last year. For a domestic economy that is currently struggling to secure basic food supplies like wheat and rice, that $8 billion is an irreplaceable lifeline. If the UAE systematically cuts off this revenue stream, we are not looking at a temporary recession. It will trigger a deep, systemic economic collapse. This expulsion campaign is actually the symptom of a permanent regional realignment. As the foundational trust completely breaks down between the UAE and Pakistan, it leaves behind a massive strategic void. And that void is rapidly being filled by India. The strategic partnership between New Delhi and Abu Dhabi is now solidifying across the economic, technological, and diplomatic sectors. We are watching the geopolitical map of the Middle East being permanently redrawn. With the gray zone completely closed, and the UAE aggressively pivoting toward new partners like India, a stark new reality is emerging. Vital financial lifelines are being cut, and everyday citizens are paying the ultimate price for high-level diplomatic failures. It forces us to ask a very serious question. Is this the beginning of total diplomatic isolation for Islamabad? And what happens to a nation when it permanently loses its regional relevance? The answer to that will undoubtedly shape the next decade of global geopolitics.